All right, dentists, if you've ever struggled to perfectly explain why a patient needs a crown instead of a filling, this video is for you. We've all been there. You recommend a crown and the patient immediately asks if you can just place a cheaper filling instead. How you handle that moment is one of the biggest factors in your case acceptance and your patient's long-term health. We're going to build your confidence from the inside out, starting with a rock-solid clinical philosophy that will then fuel a simple, powerful patient explanation. So if you're ready to master this conversation once and for all, stick with me because by the end of this video, you will have the complete battle-tested framework to handle it with confidence. Now, this entire framework is built on 3 key insights. First, we need to solidify your own clinical philosophy so that you can speak with absolute conviction. Then I'll give you a powerful analogy that makes this concept crystal clear for your patients. And finally, and this is probably the part we most struggle with, is I'll give you the exact strategy for what to do when the patient pushes back because of money. And it's probably not what you think. But first, let's start with the hard truth. The main reason this explanation is so difficult for many dentists is because deep down, the doctor themselves isn't 100% clear on the answer. The explanation feels weak because the conviction behind it is weak. We all know that in theory, with modern materials, we can technically patch up almost any tooth with composite. We can do massive, heroic fillings. And because we know it's technically possible, we get stuck. We waver. We allow our clinical judgment to be swayed because we haven't drawn a firm red line for ourselves. So the real work starts with you internally. You have to decide what you stand for as a clinician. For me, it all comes down to a core treatment philosophy. When I diagnose and treatment plan, my objective is to recommend and perform dentistry that will, in all likelihood, last for at least 10 years, and hopefully much, much longer. Anything that I predict is going to fail in less time than that, I'm just not interested in doing. Offering a temporary, unpredictable fix is not a good service to my patients. In a perfect world, I want to work on a tooth once and never have to touch it again. So my entire decision-making process is geared toward getting as close to that objective as possible. And with that philosophy as our foundation, we can now clearly define the roles of our 2 main characters, the filling and the crown. A dental filling is designed to do exactly what the name says, to fill a hole. It is a patch for a space created by a cavity. A filling is absolutely not designed to provide structural or significant structural integrity to a tooth. It's not really its job. A crown, on the other hand, is all about structural integrity. A crown is what you use when there is a fundamental structural weakness in the tooth. Its job is to act like a helmet or a brace to hold the whole thing together, to distribute the forces evenly, and to prevent further weakening or fracture over the long term. A filling simply cannot do that. And now that you have that core philosophy locked into your own mind, you have the conviction. The next step is translating that conviction to the patient without getting lost in all the technical jargon. You need a simple, powerful story they can instantly grasp. And after I give you this analogy, I'll show you how to pair it with the clear clinical red lines that makes your diagnosis undeniable. Here's the second key insight. You need the wall and foundation analogy. And it goes something like this. Mrs. Jones, that's a really great question. Let me explain it this way. Think of your tooth like a wall in a house. If you've got a small hole in the wall from hanging a picture, what do? You place a little bit of spackle, you patch the hole, you smooth it over, and it's perfect. The spackle is just filling a small contained hole. It's not holding the whole wall up. It's just patching it. That's exactly what a dental filling does. It's the spackle for your tooth. But you continue, what if that same wall had a giant structural crack running down the middle? What if the foundation is cracked and the wall is starting to bow or weaken? Are you going to fix that with spackle? Of course not. The spackle will be useless. At that point, you need to bring in an engineer. You need a solution that provides structural support. Maybe you install a steel brace or you wrap the foundation in concrete to hold it all together and prevent the crack from getting worse. That is what a crown does. A crown is the structural brace for a tooth that is no longer strong enough to stand on its own. Once the patient understands that core concept, spackle versus a structural brace, you can then show them on the x-ray or their intraoral photo exactly why their tooth is in the cracked foundation category. You can point to a visible crack line and explain that a filling won't stop it from propagating. You can show them a fractured cusp and explain how a patch leaves the other cusp vulnerable. Or you can point out the sheer width of the old filling. A great rule of thumb, well supported in the literature, is the 1/3 rule. If the preparation is going to be wider than 1/3 to 1/2 of the distance between the cusps, the remaining tooth structure is too thin and weak. A massive filling in that case actually acts as a wedge, pushing those weak cusps outward with every single bite and dramatically increases the risk of a fracture. Okay, so we've established that your philosophy, you've delivered the perfect analogy, and the patient understands it, but then they hit you with the big one. Doc, I just can't afford that right now. This is the moment where most dentists crumble. They get guilted into becoming the hero and placing a compromised restoration that they know is going to fail, which ultimately leads to a frustrated patient and a damaged reputation for you. So here's the final and most transformative insight for you today. Your confident response when a patient declines treatment due to finances. Now, this is the correct answer, the one that protects you, your reputation, and your patient's long-term health. And that is, you do nothing. You heard me right. You do not place the compromised filling. You do not jump to extracting the tooth. You do nothing. If they cannot proceed with the right treatment, that's not your fault. And you should not get guilted into doing the wrong treatment. A filling is the wrong treatment for a structurally compromised tooth. And when you place that compromised hero filling, you are taking ownership of a future failure. When that tooth inevitably breaks a year later, the patient will not thank you for saving them money. They will blame you for placing a filling that didn't last. The correct professional response is to hold the line. You can say, I completely understand the cost is a concern right now. Since the crown is the only treatment that I can confidently recommend that will be strong and last, the best option for you now is just to simply monitor the tooth. We can make sure it's clean and you can be careful with it to get as much life out of it as you can. And when your financial situation changes, we can proceed with the crown then. This approach releases you from the responsibility of a compromised outcome and places the decision squarely back on the patient, which is where it belongs. By implementing these 3 keys, solidifying your own 10-year philosophy, mastering the wall and foundation analogy, and then learning how to confidently handle financial pushback by refusing to compromise your standards, you transform this entire conversation. You go from feeling uncertain and defensive to being confident, a trusted advisor who is always advocating for the patient's best long-term interest. Now that you have the complete framework for explaining why a tooth needs a crown, we need to talk about the immense damage that happens when you ignore these principles and give in to the temptation of doing that one heroic big filling. Most dentists think the only downside of a big filling is that it might fail a little early. But the truth is, massive composite restorations are one of the single biggest sources of stress, post-op complications, and lost profitability in a dental practice. There is a specific reason why these hero fillings cost you far more than you think in the long run. And if you click on this video on the screen called Stop Doing Big Fillings, I'll break down the hidden costs and show you why committing to this philosophy will make you a more productive and less stressed dentist.